everyone. Today I have a guest coming back for a second appearance, and I'm so delighted to meet again with Erick Mikiten. Erick is a renowned architect in the Bay Area, in the area of accessible design, universal design. And when we met the first time last spring, we spoke more generally about his experience in architecture and universal design. Today, I've invited Erick back to talk about a new standard for architecture in the area of accessible design that he's been working on. He mentioned it when we met last time. Welcome to the show, Erick.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be back.
So, Erick, tell me a little bit about this accessible design standard project you've been working on.
Sure. It's a really exciting initiative that's sort of been many years in the making. Many housing developers, especially nonprofit ones, which is largely what I've worked with in the past for about 25 years of doing multifamily housing all around the Bay Area. The housing developers recognize that building codes don't necessarily create dwelling units that are really usable by everyone equally. So we're lucky here in California that we have a pretty progressive building code that requires more accessibility and use than in many other states. And there are certain national standards as well that affect everybody. But it does change state to state. And what these developers, and again, especially the nonprofits who have sort of more of a social set of goals that they're trying to follow, they know that only a small percentage of the units need to be fully accessible by code, and that because the requirements vary from state to state, especially developers who are working in multiple states or throughout the West Coast, they see that there's a lot of disparity between what people in Oregon might be getting in terms of accessibility versus California.
Can you give me a simple example of that disparity where you've seen it?
Well, one might be simply the number of accessible units that are required, the percentage within a certain project. Another could be the amount of reachable storage space in the kitchen. So we have that. That's a requirement for us in California. And that affects housing that is sort of considered public housing. And I'm using air quotes around the word public because it's pretty much anything that has any sort of public funding or is in a tax credit program and things like that. And so there's even a disparity between that group of housing and something that's done by a private developer. So and there's many other details, small and large, but they realized that although California is ahead of many states, especially in places like San Francisco, even within the landscape of California, because we have the mayor's office on disability that scrutinizes the project really closely. So they see all of these things, but even if a developer is motivated to try to do something about it, they don't know how. They don't know what to do to fix the problem. And that's because there's no guidance out there. So what we're trying to do with this design standards is at sort of the most basic level is to provide a detailed list of design tools. And these are things that developers, architects, and even the building operators can use. Sort of a kit of parts that they can employ to fix that problem and shoot for something that's better than the code rather than just relying on a baseline that might be the code.
When you say design tools, are we talking about specifications or are we talking about a more broader toolkit than simply specs?
Right. Good question. And so it's a number of different things. At the core, I would say it is, at the simplest level, it's a list, right? So it's, so in a dwelling unit, for example, in the kitchen, we'll provide a list of, 10 or 12 different elements that might be things that people might need that go beyond the code. Or in, the circulation spaces, we talk about better strategies for wayfinding. So, which might be, choosing wall colors that start to mean something to people, so that when you come out of the elevator, we've all experienced this in parking garages where there might be, a different color for each floor. So that can be involved, or that can be incorporated in a whole graphic design for the floor, and colors or carpet color selections that help to give people who might have trouble orienting or finding their way to, not necessarily a physical disability, because in these standards, we're thinking about differences between people in many, many different ways, and trying to really acknowledge that that the world is not full of, mostly normal, average, again in quotes, people, but that everybody's a little different, and so we all can benefit by some of these things, like these devices that might help to orient people as to what floor they're on, and then help to reinforce that as they're living there. It also helps a visitor. It's just like go up to the red floor, and I'm down the first hall.
So the standards that you're creating, are they primarily going to be of interest to multi-unit residential developers, or do you see a broader scope of potential application of the standard?
Yeah, it's strictly multifamily projects. So we want to, get developers and architects and building operators all interested in try to be more aspirational and look beyond the basics again of code. And one of the benefits of that, you could ask, well, why would they bother, especially if it's a for-profit developer? Not that I have anything against for-profit developers, and they are critical in creating our urban environments, but and many of them have goals for their developments that, just like with the nonprofits, are more lofty. They really want to create a better city. They want to create better living for people, and there's many ways that they already do that, and this is another avenue that they can follow. And so, the thing that one of the things that can make it more desirable to them is that when you overshoot the mark in a way with these standards, the mark being the code, then they will have their buildings meet the code more easily, because they're, it's a higher level. So
do you anticipate the standard to be something that they could brag about, for certain types of standards around energy efficiency and energy in design? You get this certification and you promote it in your literature and your marketing materials. Mm-hmm. Do you see that being a component of this standard?
Absolutely. And that's really what it all leads to in terms of the technical process that we go through for people to get scoring. So we have this, this long list of over 300 different elements at this point. And then there are certain elements that are prerequisites, so you have to include it. And then people can add different types of elements from different categories, and then they get a score. And that score can lead to being either just certified or getting a similar to the energy standards that you're talking about, which are called LEED, LEED. People can get a certification for a gold or silver, gold, or platinum.
That
So
is
they can
very,
reach these
very
different
cool.
levels.
So,
Yeah.
so is this is this going to be broader than California? This, as you
Yeah,
phrased
it's
it?
actually national.
Cool. Very
So
cool.
it started here, and was maybe a little bit easier to get traction in our particular environment here because our codes are already, going beyond what we see in many other states. Um, but we also, in putting together this set of standards, we researched codes from other states and recommendations from groups like AARP that have accessibility recommendations for single family homes. And then we found, far and wide, we found standards from even places like Ireland that have universal design standards that have suggestions that may have been some elements that, are not talked about here in the US, but that, they have as a requirement there. And so we, in the course of working on this for about a year, we and the Kelsey, who was our partner, did a lot of research and compiled a tremendous amount of information from dozens and dozens of different sources. So that this is sort of creating a set of best practices in a way.
It sounds really awesome. So when we talk about your partners, you mentioned the Kelsey. Are there any other collaborators involved in it?
Yeah, there were, the Kelsey and we, Mikiten Architecture, were sort of the core creators of this. But the Kelsey is an interesting group. They're a nonprofit in San Francisco advocating making multifamily affordable projects that are more inclusive. And their experience, and their developers, actually developing 2 large projects and partners in others. They have a wide range of experience and viewpoints. For example, inclusive rental strategies, which is, how to equitably reach out to people who are in need of housing, who might not be in the normal channels of hearing about an available multifamily, affordable, accessible apartment. Plain language leasing for people who might have cognitive differences. Ideas about selecting sites. As a developer, the first thing you're doing is selecting a site, and it's, I've seen it many times in the past where our clients come to us with a site they've already selected, but it's a poor site in terms of accessibility and opportunities for, it might be too steep. So opportunities for making outdoor spaces might be very limited for accessible outdoor spaces, or it might not be close to transit, requiring that either people be able to drive or be able to walk, maybe 5 blocks to a bus stop, or there might not be grocery stores nearby, pharmacies, things like this. So even ideas like this that are things that the Kelsey is very aware of and focuses on were folded into the standards. And then from my own experience as a wheelchair rider and somebody who uses hearing aids, I brought my 25 years of sort of multifamily experience and incorporating my lived experience into making better spaces. And we kind of combined all of these together with the research that both the Kelsey and I worked on to kind of form these standards. And so that's kind of why I think of them as a best practices. And then finally, the other 2 sort of subgroups, if you will, is that we convened an inclusive design council. This is a group of 10 people from around the country who have disabilities and work in related areas of housing and advocacy or construction. And so these were people who were actually hired through the Kelsey to provide feedback, to review the standards as we're creating them, and to provide input into the standards.
So you're really getting a national perspective as you develop this.
That's right. These people were all over the country and had, you know, a very wide variety of different types of physical and other disabilities.
So where is the project at now? Like, for example, have you are you meeting with developers around the country and promoting the standard, or is there going to be any kind of governmental recognition of it? Just where is it at, and you know, that sort of thing.
Right. Well, we finished the first round and published it and posted it in September of 2021. So it can be found, and I can give the URL here. It's thekelsey.org/design. And the Kelsey is TheKelsey.org/design.
And we'll put that in the show notes.
Right. So that's our first round. It incorporated as well commentary from architects, developers, and contractors. So, as you know, beyond the Inclusive Design Council, we also went to professionals to make sure that, for example, we weren't creating some requirements that were unrealistic for incorporating. So at this point, you know, it can be found there, and people can download them for free and start to apply them to their projects. So we're in sort of a I wouldn't quite call it a beta phase, but a sort of round one phase of this, and we're starting to get some feedback from architects and developers who are starting to look at this and getting commentary back and some sample rating processes. And so that's just starting now.
What are they saying so far?
Oh, well, everybody who I've spoken to is incredibly excited about it, and they recognize, you know, all these things that we were talking about, that it's so hard to exactly meet the code standards, and that by meeting these, it gives them wiggle room, you know, as architects, it gives them wiggle room to make sure that they're capturing the code standards. And I would say that we're not, because there's so many different codes around the country, we're not able to, you know, guarantee that our standards are going to capture every local jurisdiction's requirements and, you know, things like that. But it certainly will make it easier. So people are excited about that, and they are excited, especially the architects who I've spoken with who are in the affordable housing sort of realm. They do affordable housing just like I was saying the nonprofits do, because they want to contribute to this incredible housing need that we have, and the fact that so many people at lower income levels are experiencing a tremendous disparity of housing, you know, throughout California and in many other places in the country. And so this is their opportunity to try to fix that.
How, as you begin to get this feedback in and you tweak things, maybe add more content,
right?
Is there going to be a marketing development kind of side of this, where it gets sort of promoted at trade meetings of different developer organizations and maybe other architectural groups and government agencies involved with financing? I mean, could you see a day, for example, 5 years from now, where government funding has a string attached that it has to meet this standard?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It, you just described our sort of rollout strategy. So, we want to go to the AIA conventions, state and national. We want to advocate, in that way directly to architects who can then bring it to their clients, right? So they're going to say, oh, well, there's, something else that we can do. We want to go to state agencies, housing departments, and let them know about it, and maybe start thinking about, well, what can those state agencies do in using some of these suggestions as pathways to improving state codes. And that's a very incremental and slow process. I'm a state building standards commissioner for California, and I've been doing that for 9 years, and it's a tremendous amount of work to change the code, and it goes at a fairly glacial process, in part because it's a very public process. There's a lot of public input. There's a lot of industry input and individuals in the state. And in order to let everybody have their voices heard, it takes a long time to get anything changed, even if everybody's in agreement. It's like the minimum is a year and a half, and often it's 3-year sort of cycles that the code gets changed in. So that was the other thing that we saw in presenting something like this to people, which was a way to get around that slow code process of requirements and really leapfrog quickly. And it was, although, I started putting together lists of things that we would do, checklists for our own buildings, 12, 13 years ago, we started compiling things. It's really just been about a year that the Kelsey and we have been working actively on this, and we've got something that would have taken, any state code decades to get to, if not longer. So we want this to be something that inspires those agencies and the funders as well. So, California Tax Credit Allocation Committee could take our requirements and, as they've done with a few other accessibility requirements, they can, up them and say, well, if you're going to get our funding, you're going to get, a silver, certification. I'd love to see that happen.
So are there other organizations that you're aware of around the country that are doing anything like this, or do you believe it's nationally innovative?
So there's various groups that I mentioned. AARP, University of Buffalo is another that has commercial building standards and a checklist and rating system as well. And there's a number of other groups like Well and several others that have, even though they might not be focused on universal design, they may have a section of their requirements that deal with universal design. Might just be a smattering, but there are a few that are out there, and those are some of the things that we found in the research portion of our work.
Do you think that there will come a time, and is it a part of the longer term plan, to have a training curriculum developed around the protocols?
Yeah. We're talking about how that might be put together. Right now, we are assembling a free 1-hour training. We're calling it an orientation that can sort of get people started, get a project team together, and ask questions and help to walk them through what the basic process is for getting a certification. And then,
wow.
yeah, and so it sort of would start with with an orientation, and then potentially more detailed training would become available, and then consultation is needed to answer questions and help people to strategize, because it's whenever you have a large checklist, some things will be doable, other things less doable, and it could be dependent on the topography of your site, or which maybe you can't do anything about, or the climate that you're in, which you're dealing with, ice and snow and, treacherous walking conditions outside on, a multi-building site in Maine versus something that's in San Diego and, flat, and has fewer challenges. So we would work with developers to sort of balance the needs and the possibilities for their different projects, to get them certified, and then also start working with people who are doing maybe a remodel, where you might have a multi-building site and you're only remodeling this site and the building exterior, but nothing inside. So you could get a certification for a universally designed site.
Oh, this all sounds really awesome, Eric. I have listeners who are going to be very interested in this orientation. Where would they go to get information about that?
So that will all be on the website that I gave.
The Kelsey site that you told me about?
Right.
Okay.
So that's sort of the central place.
Awesome. Wow. Well, I just think this is great. And I really appreciate you spending some time telling me about it. And I think what we're going to have to do, Eric, is get together again next year. And so you can give us an update on this project. And, by that time, maybe it'll be ubiquitous all over the place, and or at least beginning to be adopted as a minimum standard for universally designed multi-unit construction.
Right. Yeah, we're really hoping that that a year from now, it's going to get a lot of penetration into this multifamily market, and I think that the time is just right for this sort of thinking, because I'm seeing more and more awareness throughout the country in developers and architects who I speak with, awareness in trying to create better inclusion and a desire to do better on that front, but just not knowing where to go.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your very precious time telling my listeners about this. It's very exciting, and I can't wait for it to develop further.
Well, that's great. Yeah, me too. We're very, very excited, and I appreciate your inviting me back, Stephen.